wind that sweeps off Lake Ontario and cuts through the streets of Rochester, New York, carries a chill that settles deep in the bones. It is a damp, heavy cold, the kind that preserves history in the frozen ground and keeps secrets buried beneath the snow. But some secrets refuse to stay hidden. Some stories are etched not just into the police files and the yellowing pages of old newspapers, but into the very psyche of a city. This is the story of 3 little girls, 3 innocent lives extinguished by a phantom who seemed to play a twisted game with their identities. It is a story of letters, of geography, and of a pattern so chillingly precise that it defies the laws of coincidence. Welcome to DCF Investigations. Tonight, we open the files on one of the most haunting cold cases in American history. We are walking into the darkness of the early 1970s to uncover the truth behind the alphabet murders, to understand the horror that gripped Rochester between 1971 and 1973. We must first understand the world these children lived in. This was a different era, a time often romanticized as the last golden age of American childhood innocence. Rochester was a booming industrial hub, the home of Kodak and Xerox, a city of blue-collar pride and distinct, tight-knit neighborhoods. It was a place where parents felt comfortable sending their children to the corner store alone, where the streetlights were the only curfew anyone needed. But that innocence was about to be shattered in a way that would permanently alter the way a generation of parents raised their children. The nightmare began on a gray afternoon in November of 1971, on the 16th of November, to be exact. The victim was a bright, energetic 10-year-old girl named Carmen Colón. Carmen was a child of the city, living on the west side of Rochester. She had a smile that could light up a room and a spirit that was just beginning to explore the boundaries of independence. On that fateful afternoon, she had a simple task. Her grandfather needed a prescription picked up from a local pharmacy on West Main Street. It was an errand she had likely run before, a short trip that should have taken no more than 20 minutes. Witnesses would later recall seeing the young girl in her devastating vulnerability. She was spotted arguing with someone in a car near the pharmacy. Another witness saw her seemingly distressed on the entrance ramp to Interstate 490. These were fleeting glimpses, fragments of a puzzle that would only come together when it was far too late. When Carmen did not return home, the panic that set in was immediate and visceral. Her family knew this was not a girl who ran away. She was a girl who loved her family, a girl who came home when she was told. The search for Carmen Colón was frantic. Police and volunteers scoured the neighborhood, hoping against hope that she was simply lost or hiding. But 2 days later, on November 18th, the tragic reality was laid bare. Her body was discovered roughly 15 miles away from where she was last seen. She was found in a desolate, rocky gully in the town of Churchville. At the time, the investigators noted the location, but the terrifying symmetry of the crime had not yet revealed itself. Carmen Colón. Her first name started with a C. Her last name started with a C. And she was found in Churchville, a town starting with a C. In 1971, this was seen as a tragedy, a brutal singular act of violence. She had been strangled and sexually assaulted. The brutality of the crime shocked the seasoned detectives of the Monroe County Sheriff's Office. They chased down leads, interviewed hundreds of people, and scrutinized the family. But the trail went cold. The snow fell, covering the tracks, and the city of Rochester mourned, hoping that the monster who did this had moved on or vanished. For 18 months, the city held its breath. The memory of Carmen Colón remained a painful scar, but life resumed its normal rhythm. The summer of 1972 passed without incident. The winter of 1972 came and went. Perhaps the community thought it was over. Perhaps it was an isolated incident. But evil, as we often find in these investigations, is rarely satisfied with just one victim. On April 2nd, 1973, the silence was broken. Wanda Walkowicz was 11 years old. She was a quiet girl, the youngest of a large family, living on the east side of the city, across the river from where Carmen had lived. Like Carmen, Wanda was sent on a simple errand. It was late afternoon, around 5 o'clock, when her mother asked her to run to the grocery store to buy a few items for dinner. The store was less than 2 blocks away. Wanda, dressed in her coat against the April chill, walked out the door and into the sights of a predator. She made it to the store. She bought the items: bread, milk, a few other staples. She was seen leaving the store, clutching the grocery bag. And then she vanished. The sun went down, and the Walkowicz home began to fill with that same suffocating dread that the Colón family had known 18 months prior. The police were called. The search began again. But this time, the fear was compounded by memory. The next day, April 3rd, a New York State trooper made the grisly discovery. Wanda's body was found at the bottom of a steep embankment at a rest area off Route 104. The location was in the town of Webster. The investigators looked at the file. Wanda Walkowicz, WW, found in Webster. The letter W. The realization hit them with the force of a physical blow. This was not a coincidence. This was a signature. The killer was spelling out a message in blood and geography. The media, which had covered Carmen's death extensively, now seized upon the pattern. The headlines screamed the terrifying reality to the public. Was the double initial murders, the alphabet killer. The atmosphere in Rochester shifted overnight from concern to absolute hysteria. Parents began escorting their children to school. The streets, usually filled with the sounds of play after school, became ghost towns. Every stranger was a suspect. Every slow-moving car was a potential abduction vehicle. The police were under immense pressure. They had 2 dead girls, both strangled, both sexually assaulted, both dumped in towns that matched their initials. They knew, with a sinking certainty, that if they didn't catch him, there would be a third. The police threw everything they had at the investigation. They set up task forces. They coordinated between the city police, the sheriff's department, and the state troopers. They interviewed known sex offenders, but they chased down reports of suspicious vehicles. Witnesses in Wanda's case had reported seeing a large brown or gold sedan. Some said it was a Pontiac, others weren't sure. But the description of the car became a focal point. Summer turned to autumn. The leaves in upstate New York turned their brilliant shades of orange and red, concealing the ground below. The tension in the city was palpable. Everyone was waiting for the other shoe to drop. And on November 26, 1973, almost exactly 2 years after the first murder, it did. Maenza was 11 years old. She was a sweet, dark-haired girl who lived in the calm, residential neighborhood of Webster Avenue. The irony of her street name was lost on no one. Michelle was not running an errand like the others. She was walking home from school. It was a route she knew by heart. When she was seen at a local shopping plaza, a place where kids often congregated. Witnesses reported seeing her getting into a car. The descriptions were hauntingly consistent with the previous cases. A large, American-made car, beige or gold. The driver was described as a white male, perhaps in his 30s. When Michelle did not come home, the reaction was immediate. This wasn't just a missing child report anymore. It was a 5-alarm fire. The entire city mobilized. Hundreds of volunteers joined the police. They combed the woods, the parks, the roadsides. But the pattern, the terrible, unyielding pattern, held true. 2 days later, Michelle's body was found. She had been dumped in a field off a rural road. The location was the town of Macedon. Michelle Maenza. M.M. found in Macedon. The trifecta was complete. 3 girls. Double initials. 3 towns matching those initials. C in Churchville, W in Webster, M in Macedon. The forensic evidence available in 1973 was primitive by today's standards. There was no DNA profiling. There was no GPS tracking. There were no surveillance cameras on every corner. The investigators relied on blood typing, hair analysis, and tire tracks. And they did find something. On the clothing of the victims, and specifically on Michelle Maenza, they found white cat hairs. It was a microscopic link, a suggestion that the killer lived with or spent time around a white cat. They also found traces of gypsum dust and other industrial particles, suggesting the killer might work in construction or a related trade. But clues like cat hair and dust, while intriguing, do not point to a specific name in a phone book. The police needed a suspect. And over the decades, they have had many. This is where the story of the Alphabet murders descends into a labyrinth of theories, false leads, and chilling possibilities. Let us examine the suspects, for in them lies the potential answer to this 50-year-old riddle. For a long time, the investigation focused heavily on the family of the first victim, Carmen Colón. Her uncle, Miguel Colón, came under intense scrutiny. The logic was that statistically, children are most often harmed by someone they know. Miguel was a complex figure. He had a car that somewhat matched the description. He had access. But as the other murders occurred, the theory began to wobble. Would a family member of the first victim continue to kill strangers to cover his tracks? Nor was he simply a man grieving in a way that looked suspicious to police. Tragically, Miguel Colón took his own life in 1991, leaving behind a cloud of unanswered questions. However, later DNA testing and a re-examination of the timeline have largely led investigators to believe he was not the Alphabet killer. The pattern was too sophisticated, too predatory in a stranger danger context to be a domestic crime gone wrong. Then, there is the connection to one of the most notorious serial killers in American history, Kenneth Bianchi. Before he moved to Los Angeles and became one half of the Hillside Stranglers, Kenneth Bianchi lived in Rochester. He was there during the time of the murders. He worked as an ice cream vendor, a job that gave him perfect access to children and a reason to be in neighborhoods all over the city. Or he drove a car that wasn't dissimilar to the suspect vehicle. When Bianchi was arrested in the late 70s for the LA murders, Rochester police rushed to interview him. Bianchi, a pathological liar and manipulator, played games with them. He hinted at knowledge. He danced around the subject. But despite the tantalizing circumstantial evidence, his presence, his predatory nature, his vehicle. There was never a smoking gun. Bianchi has consistently denied involvement in the Alphabet murders, even while admitting to his other horrific crimes. Some profilers argue that the Alphabet murders don't fit his later M.O. The Hillside Stranglers were a duo. The Rochester killer appeared to be a lone wolf. Furthermore, the ritualistic nature of the double initials suggests a specific compulsion that wasn't present in the chaotic brutality of the Hillside Strangler cases. But if not Bianchi, who? In 2011, a new name emerged from the shadows, a name that sent a shockwave through the cold case community. Joseph Naso. Naso was an elderly man arrested in Nevada for a series of murders in California. These murders, known as the Alphabet Murders of the West, had a terrifying similarity. The victims had double initials: Roxine Rogish, Pamela Parsons, Tracy Tafoya. When investigators dug into Joseph Naso's past, the coincidences began to pile up like snow in a drift. Joseph Naso was a photographer. He traveled extensively. And in the early 1970s, he lived in Rochester, New York. He traveled between New York and California. When police searched his home in Nevada, they found a rape diary in which he cataloged his assaults. They found thousands of photos of mannequins arranged in grotesque positions and photos of women who appeared dead or asleep. But the most chilling piece of evidence was a list. Among his writings, police found a list of descriptions. One entry simply read, "Girl from Rochester." It seemed like the final piece of the puzzle. Here was a man who killed women with double initials in California, who lived in Rochester during the child murders, and who kept trophies of his crimes. The Rochester police traveled to Nevada. They extracted DNA. They compared it to the degraded samples left on the girl's clothing. The result was heartbreakingly inconclusive. The DNA found on the Rochester victims was too old, too contaminated, or simply not of high enough quality to make a definitive match or exclusion. Furthermore, there were discrepancies. Naso's known victims were adult women, often sex workers or hitchhikers. The Rochester victims were children. Serial killers can evolve. They can change their victim preferences. But a jump from 10-year-old girls to adult women is statistically rare. Joseph Naso was sentenced to death in California for his crimes there, and he died in prison, taking whatever secrets he held about Rochester to his grave. Was it Naso? Many experts believe he is the most likely candidate. The double initial signature is so specific, so rare, that the idea of two separate killers operating with the same signature in the places where Naso lived seems impossible. Perhaps the Rochester murders were his early works, in his training ground before he shifted his focus to adults. Or perhaps the double initials in Rochester were a coincidence that Naso later adopted as his own sick trademark after reading about it in the news. There are other suspects, other theories. There is the firemen theory, born from the fact that the second victim, Wanda, was found near a fire station and that some witnesses reported seeing a man with a blue uniform. There is the theory that the killer was a person of authority, someone the children would trust enough to get into a car with. We must also consider the psychological profile of the offender. This was someone who knew the geography of the area intimately. To dump a body in Churchville, Webster, and Macedon requires knowledge of the back roads, the isolated spots where a car can pull over unseen. This wasn't a drifter passing through on the highway. This was a local. This was someone who went to work, who shopped at the grocery stores, who perhaps watched the news reports with a quiet, terrifying satisfaction. The killer likely suffered from a deep-seated compulsion. The need to match the victim to the location indicates a rigid, orderly mind. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a crime of design. The letters meant something to him. CCC, WWW, MMM. Was he trying to spell something? Was he working his way through the alphabet? If he hadn't stopped, would there have been a victim with initials SS found in Scottsville, OS, or PP in Penfield? The terror comes from the calculation. Today, the graves of Carmen, Wanda, and Michelle are quiet. The city of Rochester has grown and changed. The industrial boom has faded, and the neighborhoods have evolved. But for the families, time stopped in the early 70s. They have grown old, waiting for a knock on the door, for a phone call that says, "We got him." The investigation remains open. The Monroe County Sheriff's Office and the Rochester Police Department still have the files on their desks. They periodically retest the evidence, hoping that advances in genealogy and DNA phenotyping will finally pierce the veil of time. They are looking for that one strand of hair, that one microscopic skin cell that can build a bridge to a suspect's family tree. But as of now, the alphabet killer remains a ghost. He is a shadow that stretches across 50 years. He is the reason grandmothers in Rochester still tell their grandchildren to never, ever get in a car with a stranger. Or he is the boogeyman who turned out to be real. We are left with the haunting image of those three girls. Carmen in her winter coat, Wanda holding her bag of groceries, Michelle walking home from school. They represent the stolen potential of a generation. They should be women in their 60s now, with children and grandchildren of their own. Instead, they are forever frozen in childhood, bound together by a killer's twisted game of letters. This case forces us to look at the fragility of justice. It reminds us that sometimes, despite the best efforts of law enforcement, despite the outrage of a community, evil can slip through the cracks. It hides in plain sight, perhaps behind the face of a neighbor, a co-worker, or a quiet old man living down the street. As we close the file on the alphabet murders tonight, I want you to look at the details again. Think about the white cat hair. Think about the beige car. Think about the double initials. Is there something that sparks a memory? Is there a detail that aligns with a story you've heard? Cold cases are often solved not by police work alone, but by a person who decides to finally speak up about a suspicion they've held for decades. The wind still blows cold off Lake Ontario. The snow still falls on the towns of Churchville, Webster, and Macedon. And somewhere, the truth is waiting. This has been a deep dive into the darkness with DCF Investigations. I want to leave you with a question to ponder in the comments below. Do you believe Joseph Naso was the alphabet killer, adapting his signature over time? Or was there another monster prowling Rochester, when one who lived and died without ever being named? The coincidence of the initials is the key. Is it the work of one mind, or the universe playing a cruel trick? Let us know your thoughts. Share this story. Keep the names Carmen, Wanda, and Michelle alive. Because as long as we remember them, the investigation is never truly over. Until next time, stay observant, stay safe, and keep searching for the truth.